And we will begin. I will pass it over to Sarah and Asia to kick us off.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our July webinar. The topic of this webinar is working with vendors in AkitaBox. So we have a couple panelists here from Goodwill, Blessing, and New Vista to talk about how they have been working with their vendors in AkitaBox. I am Sarah Rantanen. I am one of the customer success managers here at AkitaBox, and Asia Ray is also a customer success manager, and we will both be here and hosting this. So we're going to bump back and forth between asking questions and kind of prompting our panelists to discuss this topic with us. In today's session, we're going to cover the decisions to add vendors, vendor use cases, managing and training vendors, and then also the benefits of adding vendors into your software.
Awesome.
So quick introduction to our panelists. We have Matthew Kautsky from Goodwill. He is the Director of Real Estate and Property Management at Goodwill North Central Wisconsin. But that's not all. He's a pretty busy bee overseeing the facility department, safety department, and new development. Matt has worked with AkitaBox at various locations over the last 8 years and is an AkitaBox power user. If there's only one thing he would say about adding vendors into the AkitaBox software, it's that the transparency and efficiency it provides him and his team is unmatched. We also have Craig Kirk. He is the director of maintenance at Blessing Health Systems in Illinois and an AkitaBox power user as well. Over the last year and a half, he has been granting his vendors access to AkitaBox in order to perform functions such as adding new assets and setting up asset relationships. The ability to add vendors into the software has saved him and his team invaluable time. And then finally, we have Matt Simpson. He is the Corporate Director of Facilities and Safety at New Vista, located in Lexington, Kentucky. Matt has a great deal of experience with adding vendors into the software and uses his most trusted vendors to access AkitaBox for visibility and ease of communication. So thank you all, the three of you, for being here again, and let's get into it. I think Asia is going to cover the first question with us. Oh, I'm sorry. First, we have an audience poll.
We do, related to our first question here. So it has now launched, but tell us, do you allow vendors to access AkitaBox at your organization today? And while folks are answering this poll question here, last but certainly not least, we also have Jessica Hamilton, who is one of the panelists. She's our support coordinator from AkitaBox, and she'll be managing our Q&A today. So if you have any questions as we go through these topics and interviews, please put them into the Q&A function so that we can address any questions, anything that you'd like some clarification on or expansion from any of our panelists. And we'll be monitoring that throughout the session today. All right, a couple more seconds for folks that want to respond to our poll. We've got most participants already answered, so we'll be closing it down in just a moment. Got it. All right, let's see. Most do not. So this is a perfect topic today for you guys. We hope that you get lots of information about what our three panelists do at their organizations, and it helps you with any of the considerations that you've been thinking of so far.
Thank you. So I am going to ask the first question. I'm going to start with Matthew. Did the idea of adding vendors make you uncomfortable?
Honestly, it didn't. I really was looking at this as an opportunity to just expand their ability to work. For those in the field, I think where we struggled is somebody would come on site, take a look, write down a part number, and then go back, order the part, come back, do that whole rigmarole. So my whole idea was give them a level of transparency to know what we have in AkitaBox, whether it's model number, year, SKU, serial number, any of those types of things, as well as our belts, hoses, or filters if it were an HVAC. So for me, I was actually really just trying to cut out this middle step that we were dealing with day in and day out. I've since kind of had a lot of help with my vendors, when they have a dispatch email, a dispatch number, I'm just assigning the work order directly to that and floating it through my process almost seamlessly to really just speed it up to get the best level of customer service to my end users. The other place that I really tried it out first was in RFPs. So looking at heating and cooling, we were bidding it out for preventative maintenance and all of that. So I was able to grant access to 3 different vendors for a period of time. They got to see everything and add comments even in there a little bit. I didn't allow them to edit anything, but to be able to see that, and honestly, the robustness of those bids and then the further implementation of those bids was just out of this world. We didn't really have any of those standard hiccups that you get. Oh, we didn't know, insert whatever it may be there. So really had a lot of great luck with that. And then the thing I always find, my vendors, when I show them what's capable there, they're just blown away with the level of intentionality that my organization has, that we've taken the time to know our assets and how to manage them, and that we're inviting them in along in that process.
Awesome, thank you. And then one quick follow-up question to that. How did your RFP process work before? And obviously it's like a lot more seamless now, but how did that work before?
Yeah, so I've been, like I said, with AkitaBox for quite a few different points in my career. Where it happened before was I was sending a technician. I was hopping up on roofs, trying to figure out what we had so that we could share that with vendors, or I was spending inspection time with a vendor or trying to find that vendor who was doing the inspection, but I don't know. I don't always feel 100% confident that they're going to grab everything, and they have more of a shot of padding it a little bit. So for me, it was really just taking that step with the AkitaBox and having them do that asset tracking really just made it a lot easier. But previously, it was arduous. Oh my.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. Craig, I'd love to hear from you. How was it when you first started adding vendors? Did that make you feel uncomfortable?
Initially, yes, it made me very uncomfortable. I wish I would have had a lot more Matt's approach or had his conversation before this. Sounds like so. It sounds like we're kind of using vendors in a little bit different ways, and he's using them more as for work order technicians and things like this. Ours is kind of more strategic of asset implementation, of just implementation and I guess identifying all the assets in our entire system. We looked at this originally as I didn't have the time for my staff to implement all these items, so we use strategic implementation through architects, engineers, and things like this, trusted vendors that are very familiar with our facility to be able to do some mapping integration and things like that. And I wish I would have done it sooner. There's no doubt we lacked for quite some while with a lot of this information that was not in there. I wish I would have pulled the trigger quicker.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Matt S., how's your comfortability with adding vendors initially?
Initially, I wasn't comfortable with it. I was always worried, had that doubt in the back of my mind that someone would get in and accidentally delete something and we'd be out of all this information we'd worked so hard to collect. But I started out with just some trusted vendors that I knew wouldn't abuse the system, and gave them some real tight parameters of what they could edit and what they couldn't, and have rolled it out to a couple of vendors and have had really good experience with it.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Sarah, I'll pass it to you for the next.
I think
And we're
have
going to do
another poll.
one more poll quick related to this next question here.
There we go. Poll.
There it is. What do you think is the biggest challenge at your organization to allowing vendor access to AkitaBox? We've got a handful of answers kind of pre-populated, but if you have a different challenge, please answer that in the chat as well so that we can see. We've got just over half participants have answered so far, so we'll keep it open for just a little bit longer to get any final answers in here. Another 10 seconds. All right, let's see. where we are. So training and security definitely seem to be the biggest barriers for this consideration so far, which, Sarah, I think this is a great lead into your next question.
Yeah, definitely. So the next question, I'd like to start with Craig, because I know you talked about you're using your vendors a little bit differently. I'd like to ask you about what kind of vendors you work with, which have access to AkitaBox, which do not, and why.
Yeah, so looking at this right now, really we have our architects, our engineers, and our consultants really a part of this. What we implemented, I don't know what everybody else's facility looks like, but we have buildings from 1920, 1929, 1952, 61, 70, 82, just a number of different vintages all tied together. And obviously renovations throughout those on different floors and different things throughout the years. So it's a mess. So what we started off with was have our engineer coming through and design and put in here as built to the entire campus of all the steam, all the domestic water, all the chilled water, things like that, which was huge. They're the ones that designed all this, so it just made sense for us to give them information to do the room asset relationship, to give them access to do all this type of stuff. Otherwise, they would have been guiding somebody else to do it. We would have been paying two people. So that's why we decided to go that direction. We're not really using right now any of our HVAC contractors. We're not using our fire alarm technician. I see how some of these other individuals are with this panel information, and it's really opening my eyes right now, which is kind of, we've always just been very, very, I guess, babysit-ish type to escort these vendors and do these things. Everybody knows staffing is getting tighter and tighter. If we have the ability to not have a staff go with them, for example, fire extinguishers, why not just print the map off, send it to the vendor, and let them take off? These things make a lot of sense. So it's definitely opened my eyes a little bit to think about opening this up a little bit further to these people.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also starting with your trusted, your closest vendors helps a lot, because then you really get those processes in place with folks that you're really comfortable with or have a very close relationship with, and that can give you insight into working with your vendors who you may be not as close with.
I completely agree. Sorry. Yeah, no, we have a smaller market here. So we have a plumber that we've worked with. He's been here for longer than I've been here, 18, 20 years. So, I would feel very comfortable giving him access. An electrician the same way, certain individual vendors right there, I would have no problem giving those ones the access.
Yeah. And I know we also talked about training. And I think that was another poll answer. Big part of some people's fear is having to train those vendors. How did you find vendor training within AkitaBox to go?
It actually went really smooth, and there wasn't even a time. It was a team effort. A lot of times we just had ongoing meetings with you all alone, AkitaBox, and help walking us through this. I think one of the biggest things that I noticed with AkitaBox, we may not always get the changes we want immediately, but you're very, very open to hearing customer feedback and then implementing those changes. Time and time and again, not just from what benefits us as the end user, but also what benefits our engineers and our architects. You guys are very instrumental in the training and updating adapting to our need the entire way. So it worked out well for us.
Yeah, great to hear. Yeah, and also just a good reminder too that, your AkitaBox team is here to support you in training and getting your team up and running, but we're also here to help support if you've got vendors getting in, supporting their training. I'm going to go to Matthew. Do you want to talk a little bit about which vendors you decided to work with in AkitaBox and why?
Yeah, like Craig just said, I'm kind of the opposite of that. And I'm holding off on letting my general contractor, my trusted true contractor who are building my buildings and engineers having a hold of them. So I'm working a lot with heating, cooling, my roofing contractors, fire protection, and just kind of the spattering there, and my plumbers as well. So I have found that it's just been kind of a great little relationship that we have. Probably not unlike the other individuals on this. I've got a rather geographically diverse area from side to side on the state and top to the bottom as well. So having a place that they all can go to, because a lot of these organizations, my heating and cooling, are actually in 4 different cities. So not knowing where to go or how to do that and which one gets what, AkitaBox has really helped out with, again, that dispatch and how to kind of go through. The training for me and putting it through to those vendors. Honestly, it's a lot of side by side sit down, just kind of showing it to them when I'm going through that RFP process to get the excitement level up is one of the I found a key way, because they're like, oh my gosh, that could make my life easier. That could, like, they start to buy into the idea of it on that front end. Then when it kind of goes to it, I've gone to the point of buying a tablet for some vendors who are a little hesitant, to put it mildly, to do this, because we can get a tablet for next to nothing these days, and then they have it all in their hands and they feel equipped. Because lots of times that was a hurdle for us of like, how do we get this? They don't want to have to go back to their desk to type this all in. I'm like, well, great, I will spend a couple $100, buy you a tablet, and they can do it on the fly. But the real training of it was we would hold weekly meetings with them, and we would do that for probably 2 or 3 months. And then we always have an open dialogue. If they're having a question, sometimes they post questions that we throw it right back to the AkitaBox team and say, hey, we're seeing this, what's going on? Or, hey, we're seeing this, how can we figure out a different way to address this? The data is there, just can't grab it the way that we're looking for. So again, we've been really tapping in. So we deal with Jasmine. I dealt with you, Sarah, before, but we would just tap in and say, hey, this is what we're trying to get. How can we do it? So that's what we've seen, at least.
Oh, great. Awesome. Thank you. And Matt S., what kind of vendors are you working with in AkitaBox? And do you have any that you chose not to work with, and why?
Primarily, it's our HVAC contractor that has used AkitaBox the most. And it's once I've got one that I work with that's particularly tech savvy. He came to HVAC from IT, and he took to it like a duck to water. He just loves the format and can pull all sorts of information, uses it all the time in order to look at a piece of equipment and start to troubleshoot it before he even goes to the site. So it was no problem at all to bring him on. With some other vendors that aren't as tech savvy, sometimes it takes a phone call or sitting down side by side or over Zoom. It's never taken more than a couple of minutes to get somebody to where they're comfortable once they realize that they really can't do anything wrong. It's real handy to show them. You click back up at the little A symbol in the upper left hand corner, and that takes them back to the place that they started. So it's been very intuitive. And it hasn't taken a lot to get people to adapt to it.
Great. That's great to hear. Yeah, I think probably everyone on the call knows how user-friendly AkitaBox is. So transfer that to your vendors, and probably just a couple minutes of showing them around, they can get comfortable in there. Matt, I know you also talked about having fire extinguishers kind of all over your properties, and you have a lot of technicians that come in. So you've been having vendors work on your fire extinguisher preventive maintenance. Is that correct?
Yes. The company we do our fire extinguisher service with, their manager has an AkitaBox account, and a lot of times when she's sending a new technician to one of our sites, she'll print them out a map of the building with the fire extinguishers marked. And so when they get there, they can just go, location to location and know exactly where things are.
Perfect. That's got to be a big time saver for them and for you guys as well.
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to hand it back over to Asia for the next question.
Unmute myself. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the last one. You all kind of told us how you onboard your vendors or get them started, but I'd like to know who conducts the onboarding on your team, and I'll actually start with Craig for that one.
Yeah, for the onboarding, it's one of our maintenance leaders right now, a manager, a director, or a life safety individual that will get them access into this. And then it's simply going to be a combination of one of us doing it with AkitaBox in the background helping if needed.
Okay, so, and now I will go over to Matthew, actually. Let's go with Matthew. How you already kind of explained how you onboard your vendors, but who conducts that training, and then what kind of time commitment is that?
Yeah, I have got an amazing person in Brittany. She's been a part of our team, and she was the implementer of AkitaBox. She is a rock star with training. It's actually kind of been her growth thing that we've kind of been coaching her on to actually put her into some more elevated roles with that. So for us, that's just been part of it for her to do it, and her investment in that onboarding, a couple hours, and then ongoing 10-minute calls every now and then.
And then I know that you said when we spoke that you actually do a little bit of that training as well. With all that you have going on, how is that for you?
Honestly, mine is more on the fly, and it's usually when I'm doing a vendor check-in. So I'm a huge believer of treating my vendors almost identical to my employees, where I'm having regular check-ins, whether it be a monthly one-on-one or a grading report card, so that we understand at the end of the year where we're all sitting at. So a lot of times in those, when we're going through what are the opportunity areas, what are the growth areas, how can I better equip you, what would need to be true to make this happen? That's where I see a lot of it. And again, for me, I've got my tablet on me at all times, and I just whip it out and we'll go through it and we'll walk through it in that exact moment. And honestly, it's probably 3 minutes to 4 minutes. I probably spend more time logging in, just getting my VPN and stuff set up correctly, than I do actually take the time to show them kind of the clicks through and where we might see something like that. So for us and me, really quick. And again, when I'm doing those check-ins, that's where I see it the most.
Thank you. And then, Matt, as you also said, it's kind of like depending on, how tech savvy your vendor is, on how long it takes or the commitment for you to onboard. But is that you usually conducting that onboarding training with them, or do you have a team that does that?
It's usually myself or my maintenance supervisor. And, usually we're talking minutes. It's not hours of training. It's a couple of minutes, a phone call, an email, and they're on their way.
Awesome. That sounds like a pretty easy process. I think before we go on to the next question, are we going to pop in another poll?
We certainly are, yes. So for the handful of folks that, aside from our panelists here, do have vendors in the software, if you've added them, what positive impacts have you seen so far? This is a multiple choice question, so please feel free to choose any that apply to you. And same thing as well as the other one. If there's something that's not on this list, please put it into the chat as well so that we can see. I'll keep it open for just a little bit longer here. Got some answers still filling in. All right, let's see what our results are here. Okay, so transparency, communication, accountability, definitely some perks that help every single organization. But let's learn more about that as well from our panelists. Sarah?
Yeah, great. Next topic question we want to go over is, what do you think is a great benefit of adding your vendors into AkitaBox? So what is the biggest benefit that you've seen? Matthew, can I start with you?
Absolutely. Like I've just kind of hammered in over and over, is just transparency. The fact that they are a trusted partner with us when we bring them on to perform work, we're already kind of stepping into that relationship. This just seems like a continuation of it, and providing that transparency for us. Like I said, it has reduced the amount of random call outs with the 2-hour trip minimums to figure out whatever piece it is that they needed. So for us, that has just been the greatest benefit for us across the board, with that level of transparency. So they know what they're getting into, we know what we're getting into, and we can make decisions together really quickly.
Yeah. What are some ways that you kind of watch them in AkitaBox and you are able to access that transparency?
Messages, whether it be a message of a work order that we've assigned to them, whether it be they're adjusting the lifespan of some of our assets. So saying, you know what, the condition of this particular thing, let's just call it a rooftop unit, is actually better than we thought. And it may be a 15-year unit, but we're going to give it a better grade, and we're going to push out that lifespan another year or two on that, versus just kind of going with the standard algorithmic, times that are put there. So, and lots of times when they would make that level of an adjustment, they would be talking to me as well. But sometimes we've had that pop through and I get a follow-up email to say, hey, we did this, and it's very helpful.
Yeah, you've got some documentation of it. Great. Craig, what about you? What are some of the benefits that you've noticed?
A lot of along the lines of the same thing. It's freeing up, time for our staff to do their jobs rather than babysitting the vendors. There's no doubt. I'm really happy to see that these other individuals are having a lot more success in this, and it's opening my eyes to maybe release the reins a little bit more. So I've seen how much it's done just in the little amount that we have released, and look forward to doing more.
Yeah. And can you describe a little more of maybe kind of the tangible benefits to your staff having more time, free time to do their job? Do you see better production with your preventive work, or other things that they have more time to do now that you're working with vendors?
There's pros and cons of everything. Babysitting these individuals, it's good because they know where every system's at. They know how to respond. They know all the systems extremely well. But also, we're all fighting staffing issues. We're all fighting a number of things right now that we need to find out ways. Is it value added that we know where every fire extinguisher is? No, because it's on the map. So there's a good balance in there.
Yeah, awesome. Great. And Matt asks, how about you? What are some great benefits that you've seen?
Just the availability of information. That's been the big thing. The fact that a vendor can look in and see model and serial numbers of equipment from wherever they are, because our locations are so spread out over such a rural area that sometimes it's a trip back and forth from one end of Kentucky to the other to get parts can really make a big difference in whether something gets fixed today or if it gets fixed tomorrow or next week. And so having that information at their disposal will cut down on that time dramatically.
Yeah, so it's giving them some insight before they even get on the road, right? Very cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys. I think we're going straight over to Asia then.
Yes, thank you. So we've talked about some really good benefits, which is great. We always love to hear the positive things. However, what are, some cons of adding vendors into the software? And I will start with Matt, as I'm going to start with you again.
Well, anytime somebody has access to information, you run the risk of them corrupting that data, or whether it's intentional or unintentional. So there is that concern. But thus far, we've had no problems with that.
Awesome. And I think that goes in line with you saying that you really work with the people that you trust the most. So you run into those issues. So that's great. Matthew, how about you? What would some cons be for you?
I think some of the cons are really just been through the coaching. Lots of times things will get closed out and they won't communicate to the level that we may have wanted. They're like, oh, the work's done, close it out, they'll log their hours. And then all of a sudden you're just like, great, that's awesome. But you didn't tell the end user, the end receiver that happened. And that's kind of a service level agreement that we have with our customers, our retail stores, our operational centers, is to say, when something's closed out, we even go to the extra step of saying, closed out, let us know if there's anything more that's going on. So I would say that is something, and that goes to coaching and just onboarding the correct individuals along with it. I don't have a whole heck of a lot of cons, I guess. That's probably the biggest one that we're experiencing on a daily basis. The only other thing is we're trying to work through the challenge. So I'd heard mention fire extinguishers. We are trying to figure out a good way to balance out or deal with this fact of when either we're talking about a recharge of them or they remove it completely from the store it was used. Sometimes they'll just take it out of the store, which is great. But working through some of those details, we've run into some challenges here and there. So.
Them. And then I know we also discussed like when you have, someone that you have to work with, you have like a specific contract with them, and then you also have like, you have to have like two bids. So you have to work with both. So that could be a little bit frustrating for some, but it seems like, you work with people that are really great, and having that conversation is not too bad.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So we do, when we open it up, like I said, in the very start of this, is we'll open it up to all the vendors. We'll just give them very restricted accounts, view onlys, where they can come in, take a look at all of the assets and all of the pieces of those assemblies that they may need. And, we go into it, and hopefully, I mean, how we sell it in that particular standpoint is, you know what, you've got every bit of information. You've got everything I would, so you're able to bid at such a more intelligent way that, your setup is best I can possibly do. And, we just kind of work through what that is. So.
Now, how do you manage when you're changing your vendors out? Like, does that kind of make it a little bit more admin work for your team, making sure that the vendors that you're not using anymore don't still have access to something that these shouldn't?
No, I mean, so with a lot of our assets, we do monthly checks just to make sure that we have the correct users in it. In AkitaBox, if we're switching a contractor out, what we want to do and what we do in those instances is we've got a flow of things that we go through. Whether it is, we've got their W-9, their certificate of assurance, we have got them set up in ACH. It's just another one of those tags in the line of, hey, is the previous one removed, and then is the new one set up? A lot of times when we talk about that instant email that goes out to them, that's the thing. So that's just part of our flow, part of our process as we kind of work through those transitions. And we haven't really run into any challenges. We have had one who came back to us and said, look, we know we're not your contractor, but we want to show this to somebody. So we have done that a time or two where we've granted that access just to show them what it was and how they were doing records. So yeah.
So thank you for that. Sounds like you guys have a old machine going. Craig, how about you? What would you say some cons you might run into?
I think the biggest one that we see that's kind of the red flag is lack of consistency. You have different engineering firms that are strong A, strong E, different things like that. So the biggest thing I can tell you, get a standardization in your organization and make sure that's getting sent out to each one of these, no matter who's bidding it. That's probably one of the biggest things I can tell you here. If you're not going out to bid against the other ones, you're going to give the same individual that has the keys of the kingdom, all the freedom. You're going to get, you could start getting price shock a little bit. You could get some things like that. Yeah, the standardization of a naming convention is key.
Thank you. Good tidbit. Sarah, I'm going to pass it to you.
Yeah. The next one, a little bit short. How do you enforce your vendors completing work in AkitaBox? So Matthew, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, for me, it starts again back at RFP. When you list out, what are the requirements of it? It's that treating them like an employee, treating them just as an employee, and saying these are our expectations. If we don't meet these expectations, we check in. We talk about action plans, performance plans as it relates to it. I think one thing that I often do when I bring somebody new in is I say, we're going to fail. We're going to fail together on the onset. We won't hit 100%. What we do with that failure is how we're going to become best together. So I'm setting up on that first end. We have a 1-week check-in, then we do a 30-day check-in, and all these different pieces of the puzzle to make sure that we're really hitting it out of the park and they have a clear expectation. I'm not going to say it's 100%. We definitely have a couple challenging individuals, and I can recall them by name. But we work with our people to try to figure that out. I mean, we have internal teammates who have challenges putting anything beyond a 2-word response. So it's it's an ongoing thing. If somebody figures it out, they're going to have to tell me. But it's just a constant piece of the puzzle that we are really working on.
Yeah, definitely. And then how do you hold them accountable inside AkitaBox? Is there anything that you do or look for in AkitaBox to watch their work?
Yeah, so it's a little challenging. So year to date, we're at probably about 2,600 work orders we've completed. So taking the time to go through every single one of those is not a feasible state with the staffing levels that we have. But we do random audits of them just to kind of grab ones that were there. Also, I mean, on the flip side, my customers are really, really good about talking to me. If they're not getting the level of communication that they're after, I'm hearing about it there. Um, and a large part of this is trust. I know it's really hard for all of us to let go of things, myself included, but I have to have a level of trust with them in that. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's good to remember always. Craig and Matt, I know that you didn't really have answers to this question because you're working a little bit differently with your vendors. Was there anything that you wanted to add to this topic?
Yeah, I think you did a really good job answering that. And staff, I think sometimes are our biggest challenge. The one good thing that we're dealing with vendors right now is if I'm not getting what I want, it's easy to hold the payment. So I have a lot more leverage, I feel like, over the vendor than I actually do my staff. So
Yeah, that's a good point. Great. Okay, back to Asia.
Thank you. So almost done. Thank you guys. This one is, what advice would you give another organization considering vendor access? I think so far you all have been, advocates of it and have given really good advice already, but what would that advice be? And Matt S., I will start with you on this one.
Just to decide what level of control you're willing to give a vendor. Start there. Start with folks that you already know and trust, and just take it a step at a time and give them, the access that you're comfortable with, and spool up from there.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Craig, what would you say? What advice would you give another organization
I
considering
think two
vendor
things:
access?
a standard naming convention, and do it now rather than wait. It's going to take a huge load off you, and it's going to push it onto somebody else, and you utilize your resources.
Awesome. Thank you. Last but not least, Matthew, what advice could you give?
Actually, I want to go and take on the coattails there. Conventional naming assets. My goodness, probably the most important thing. We're struggling with that with a couple of pieces of equipment right now. So just hammer in on that before you open it up to anyone else. The other thing, the mantra that we kind of run with is crawl, walk, run. Start out small, take it with like the other Matt had said, just start with somebody you trust. Start maybe if you're a multi-site place, just start on a single site. That's what I've done, and that's how I built my comfort to be able to do this a little bit faster. So again, kind of the approach I would jump on.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. All right. Finally, Sarah with the last question.
Yes. Matthew, I'm going to have you close this out. Last question we have is anything that you feel your team does really well surrounding vendors? So your own internal team, what do you feel like they're doing really well in working with your vendors?
I think my teams do a great job in identifying correct level of work to actually split between the vendor and themselves, meaning um, you know, often the technicians that I represent can be a squad who wants to do it, wants to achieve it, and wants to do it themselves. There's a sense of pride, satisfaction, and in some points worth. And I think when we start talking about that value proposition of their worth, trying to instill in them, hey, your worth is even better with a partner. And really just hammering that in. So we've done a great job in the last year and a half of really empowering our teammates to work with vendors to decide who is best to do that actual level of work based upon a whole set line of criteria. So
Amazing. Great. Wonderful. I want to thank you all again so much for participating and going over these questions and your experiences multiple times with us. And for the rest of our customers here joining. I hope this is really useful for everyone. I think Jessica now will probably address a couple of questions that were submitted, and we can open it up for Q&A as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So just a reminder, if you do have questions, please throw them in the Q&A in your Zoom toolbar at the bottom, and we will address those now live. So we do have one that came in. I believe anyone can jump in and answer this one. So question is, does anyone here use AkitaBox for contractor safety management, such as vetting, incident management, inspections, review of documents? Does anyone use it for that type of work?
I can say that we don't. We actually are utilizing smart sheets for the management of a lot of those things that were just mentioned. I would, I guess, ask to clarify, are you the question of inspections? Or are we talking about the inspection, using the inspection sheets they're providing, or the inspection sheets that we have in our PM schedule or our maintenance schedules or things like that? As it relates to if it were them sending in their inspection reports, we do take those inspection reports, link them to the work order, of course, and so on and so forth to make sure that we log those there. But I'm not certain of what level of inspection we're talking about.
All right, so it sounds like maybe not for that question really. All right, so another question here. So you all talked about, I believe, not like 100% of your vendor work is being, or your vendors have access to AkitaBox. So can you talk about a little bit about how vendors who don't have access, how you're tracking that work? Are you or someone on your team managing that work in AkitaBox? Is that just being checked outside of AkitaBox? A little bit about that.
Yeah, it seems like we each use this a little bit differently here. It feels like my staff, I use internal staff. I have internal HVAC staff, internal electricians, internal maintenance staff that are doing 95+% of our work. So the other things that they're doing here are simply, it'll be a work order will come down and one of my staff are going through it with the vendor, and then they'll fill out and close the work order. So that's kind of how we're using it.
Matt S., did you have something too?
That would be what Craig said is more how we're using the system.
I would add, I run probably about a 65 to 70% contracted services department versus internal house or in-house individuals. There are a small spattering that we do not grant access to it. A lot of times, so parking lot maintenance. I know it seems like a weird one, but that's just a different batch of individuals and crews, and we have not found the right vendor for that. So we were managing that through our own just retyping. Like I said, the person, my implementer, Brittany, she is the one who's actually inputting those in when we're either doing a seal code, a new line stripe, and things of that nature. Not ideal, but how we are kind of muddling through that one until we can figure out the correct partner.
A question here, sounds like this one's for you specifically, Matthew. Has anyone denied an RFP because a vendor refused to join AkitaBox? Was that ever the reason?
It has not been explicitly such. Most vendors, even so for us, snowplow, we get bit of snow around up here. Even there, you're starting to see some transitions in that workforce, their GPS tracking, their trucks, all that. I think as we kind of move and groove into this very connected society, or worth, won't get into that, but like just as we get into this connected society, most of our vendors are trending towards that. There are some that are apprehensive, but I think part of it, and the reason a lot of us are here is because it is intuitive. It makes sense. There's 4 ways to get to the same thing. I can get there by a map. I can get there by a list. I can get there by the work order, just clicking the blue link. So because of that, I've had to convince a person or two, absolutely, but I've never lost a bidder because they wouldn't use the system. Usually when a vendor self-selects out, it's due to much different circumstances.
Awesome, thank you. And then kind of going along with that question, have you had a vendor want to charge you more to, take this additional step, or use AkitaBox as a way to track their work? I think anyone can actually answer that, whatever work that you're having a vendor track in AkitaBox.
I would
I think
say
it's always a concern when they start, yeah, and then once they get into it and they start getting used to it, it's just like any other thing. It's no different checking in a front door before when we had wide open doors and things like that. Everybody's going to complain a little bit when it starts, and then they get into it, and it's just another part of their daily activities.
I've had about 6 years ago when I started doing something along these lines with an HVAC vendor, they actually did ask for extra money on the front end. I actually obliged them and I said, show me the lift in time. So we wrote a contract where I said, when you are closing out a work order, when it's more than 5 minutes, show me that lift. I'll pay you for that lift. Well, miraculously, that lift never occurred. So I took and doubled down on the bet because I just said, you know what, 5 minutes on a work order, let's face it, when you bill at an hourly rate, there's usually a minute or two left in those, and we can squeeze into those timeframes. This should not be, it should not be a hours ad. Now, I can't speak to the other gentlemen and individuals on this panel. If you have an engineer who's going in for hours and hours, well, that might be a completely different state. But when it comes to a straight up vendor who is performing a service for you, generally speaking, there's a little bit of wiggle room in their hours that allow for this type of service to occur. So I found I've had it posed to us, but every time we've kind of gone at it that way, they agree to it, and I have yet to really get billed for it. So maybe I'm lucky.
Well, that's great. I mean, they're going to have to show their work some way. It's just the medium in which, so you can show them and actually maybe saves them some time. That can be even greater. All right, well, that is all the questions that have come in so far. Anyone have anything else before we wrap up for today?
I've got one that we didn't really talk about. We've talked a little bit about vendors pushing back on access, but have any of you experienced internal pushback about allowing external entities into the software from management, IT security, stakeholders? Who pushed back, and how did you get around that question?
We're all dealing with IT security nowadays, and it's almost impossible to get anybody through our system here with our IT security. Being that this is a web-based program, we didn't have to go through them at all. It worked very flawlessly. We simply add their email address and give them permission right through our maintenance team, and it works good.
Yeah, I've had no pushback at all.
Awesome. Matt K?
I'm doing good as well. Ditto.
Awesome. You guys are lucky.
Awesome. It looks like we don't have any additional questions. So again, I want to thank our panelists for joining us today. Jessica, thank you for managing our Q&A, and all of the attendees, thank you guys for attending. We do have a recording that will be available soon. And yeah, everyone have a wonderful day.
Everyone.